Right, we are in the third week of Nehemiah study, Precept Upon Precept. Lesson 3, chapter 6 through 7 is covered. And God is speaking to us about the life of Nehemiah, trying to give us more of an understanding of who this man is, and as a man of God, as a person who faced with conflicts and enemies all around him, even people that were his own, his own brothers, then he always dealt with them in prayer. And I love that. When we first meet Nehemiah, he's in the king's court, and he's talking to the king about how he wants to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild these walls, because his heart, it's breaking his heart, And he prays before he answers the king. Just even while standing there, you didn't have to go off and be alone. Even in that moment, God was present in Nehemiah's moment, in a situation where he had to talk to the king. And it was in that moment that God directed Nehemiah and helped him. Just like throughout the Bible, we see people come to life and realize that these are real people in real situations that God is dealing with and working with, so that he can give us an example of how he wants to deal with us and work in our lives. I get noticed by, I notice things sometimes throughout the day, or every now and then, that God just kind of says, it's like he's jabbing you on the shoulder, hey, I love you, those kinds of things. And today, as an example, I was filling out some insurance paperwork at the doctor's office this morning, and they're like, don't forget to put your emergency contact, who are you going to call? So I was like, well, Ghostbusters, obviously. It was a side joke I just had to make, and it was really irrelevant to anything else until I was listening to one of the messages from this past weekend from my pastor, Danny Carroll, out in California, and he was talking about how God was teaching him about spiritual warfare, and about how when he was, learning these things, he was being kind of teased and jested by some of the other missionary guys on the trip, and they were like humming the Ghostbusters theme, Just at that moment when he said that, it was completely irrelevant, but it's just like, to anything else, but it attached to this other part of what I did earlier in the day. I was like, wow, God is so good. And he does those things, and I believe he will do those things in your life. Not just, something subtle like that. It's not a coincidence. I'm sorry. There's no coincidences, and there's no accidents. God is purposeful and intentional and willful in what he does with you. And he wants you to do that, be that with him. I've been learning a lot about, going on quiet times and being alone with God and having time alone with him, but not just being alone with him, but intentionally, purposefully, willfully. Those are the words that my pastor used to describe what, our quiet time with God needs to be like. Daily, to be with him in quiet, laying all your burdens down to him, giving all of your worries over to him, all your anxieties, all of those things. Very much that's what Nehemiah did. Nehemiah was a man of prayer. When he was faced with opposition, with this trial of rebuilding the wall, he went to God and prayed. It says, Nehemiah chapter 6, the enemies, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab, and the rest of the enemies, were coming against them again. Threatening Nehemiah, threatening the people. And then it says, the wall kept getting built, halfway up, and then it finished. And when they finished building the wall, there was a moment where everyone was just like, wow, the hand of the Lord is really in this. God has transformed Israel, transformed Jerusalem, transformed his people, transformed Nehemiah in this work. God's hand has been in this. And very much the wall, the restoration, is our lives, is a picture of very real events that took place, back in 400 so BC, but a picture of what God wants to do in our lives. See, Nehemiah didn't walk around as rebel and say, oh, we can just live in this. No, he said, I can't live in this. We've got to fix the wall, fix the breaches. It's interesting that earlier in Nehemiah, one of the enemies uses the phrase that if a fox were to jump on the wall, it would fall down, because they just can't build anything worth standing up. foxes are actually used quite a bit in the Old Testament. And even in the New Testament, there's references to foxes. There's clearly a lot of them out there. But the point is, in the book of Song of Solomon, the term foxes is used when the two lovers are talking to each other about, they're, asking, to keep the foxes away from the vineyard. To keep the foxes from destroying their walls, their hedges of protection, and their garden. That's what it's saying. The same thing with Nehemiah, keeping those things away that would break down the walls. And you can use walls and throughout the Bible and see what God is teaching us through that. And it's an interesting study that you can go through. There's also, in the Precept study, K. Arthur goes through and talks about how the people were frightened by the enemies, and Nehemiah is in contrast to that, don't be frightened of the enemy, but have fear of the Lord, for He is awesome. Don't worry about people, because Proverbs 29:25 says that men, fear of man is a snare. Trust in God and be exalted. Isaiah 2:22 says, stop regarding man, whose breath is in his nostrils. He is not the sustainer of life. I was taking a bath yesterday, and I was listening to some praise music, and I was just, breathing in and out, just kind of seeing how, for some reason, I realized, when you let all of the air out, let all the hot air out, you sink deeper, right? But then when you inflate air, obviously you're going to float. But that was kind of a picture of how God wants us to go deeper with Him. He wants us to sink deep into His presence. But to do that, we have to let it all out. Let all of our hot air out. Let all the pride out. Give it all to Him. Let Him have it, because He wants it. He wants a relationship with us and wants to be close to us. Talks about how the enemy tried to trick Nehemiah to go into the temple, and he wouldn't have that. Constantly, praying. It's incredible that this thing, the temple, the wall, was rebuilt like 52 days. It's just that was pretty good. But that only happened because the people got together and did something for God together. They unified. They knew they had to. Talks a little bit in chapter 6 about Tobiah and how a lot of the people in Judah sided on his side because of his links to their people. And you gotta be careful who you bond yourself to, who you link yourself to. Chapter 7 is a long list of all of the people that took place, guarding the wall, and the servants. You got appointing guards to the wall. Nehemiah appoints guards, and then he enrolls people to keep track of genealogies and figure out who everyone is and where they came from, so that we can, because everyone had been scattered and now they're back, so we got to make sure that everyone's where they are meant to be. All the captives that have returned. Sets of the Levites as worshipers before God. Temple servants. And then, the total of the assembly. I think there's 245 people singing. They got thousands of people here, and only 245 of them are singing. I guess that's just the specific ones that felt that call of God on their lives, or that could sing. I like singing and I can't sing, but and as I get nudged a lot in church, stop being so loud. That's why I sit close to the worship people, because then all the noise drowns my tone out. The angels are about the only ones that can appreciate my joyful noise. The Lord, of course. And I love how it mentions here that the world that Jesus died for hates Him. And the same way, the people around Israel were hating Israel. They didn't like what Israel was doing. Well, a few things written here. Nehemiah, you can think about Nehemiah, his leadership, his political leadership, his ability to deal with the enemies. All had to do with his prayer life. Even when he was before the king, he prayed. And I love it says, one part, it says, he contended with himself and then with others. He talked things over with himself, and God. But I love that. It's he said these things out loud. You talk out loud before God and just ask Him what to do. Ask Him what's going on. What's going on in your life, the walls that need to be rebuilt. Don't be satisfied with living in a land of rubble and shrugging your shoulders and just saying, we'll just deal with it. But rebuild. Concentrate on rebuilding. And that's the end of lesson 3. Lesson 4 for next week is chapters 8 through 10. Carry into that.